Dr. Marcus Weber stood before his Philosophy 301 class at the prestigious Riverside University, holding a worn copy of Schopenhauer's The World as Will and Representation. The autumn light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the lecture hall, filled with eager undergraduate faces. Today we examine one of philosophy's most controversial figures, Marcus began, his voice measured and careful. Arthur Schopenhauer's views on women and relationships reflect both his era's limitations and his penetrating insights into human psychology. Among his students sat Elena Rodriguez, a brilliant graduate student whose thesis on feminist philosophy had already garnered attention from academic journals. She shifted uncomfortably as Marcus continued, knowing the territory they were about to enter. Schopenhauer believed that romantic love was nature's trick, the will to live, using desire to ensure reproduction, regardless of individual happiness, Marcus explained. He saw what he called the natural deception in relationships, where passion blinds us to incompatibility. Elena raised her hand. Professor Weber, how do we reconcile studying these ideas with their obvious misogynistic elements? Marcus paused, recognizing the intellectual challenge ahead. This question would haunt him for months to come, forcing him to examine not just Schopenhauer's philosophy, but his own assumptions about gender, power, and truth. 3 blocks from the university, Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her psychology practice, listening to her client Michael describe his latest relationship disaster. At 35, Michael was a successful architect who seemed incapable of maintaining lasting romantic connections. She seemed perfect at first, Michael lamented. Beautiful, intelligent, successful, but once we moved in together, everything changed. She became demanding, manipulative. It's like she put on this mask during courtship. Sarah, a specialist in attachment theory and relationship psychology, had heard variations of this story countless times. What interested her wasn't Michael's narrative, but the pattern itself, how often her male clients described feeling deceived by women who had simply revealed their full, complex humanity over time. Michael, what if what you're calling deception is simply the natural progression from presentation to intimacy? Sarah suggested. We all curate ourselves during courtship, men and women alike. But Michael shook his head. There's something different about women. They have this power, this ability to transform themselves, to present whatever image serves their purposes. Unknown to both of them, Sarah's next client would be Elena Rodriguez, seeking therapy to process her conflicted feelings about studying philosophers whose ideas about women ranged from dismissive to hostile. Elena scrolled through her dating app matches, each swipe a micro-decision in the modern marketplace of romantic possibility. The irony wasn't lost on her. A feminist philosopher participating in a system that reduced human connection to curated photographs and witty one-liners. Her phone buzzed with a message from David, a 29-year-old tech entrepreneur whose profile radiated carefully constructed authenticity. Their conversation had been intellectually stimulating, touching on everything from startup culture to existential philosophy. Want to grab coffee and discuss the commodification of human connection? David had written, displaying exactly the kind of self-aware irony that attracted Elena. But as she prepared for their date, Elena found herself falling into familiar patterns, selecting the outfit that best flattered her figure, choosing jewelry that suggested sophistication without ostentation, practicing conversational topics that would showcase her intelligence while remaining approachable. Was this the very deception Schopenhauer had identified? The unconscious performance of femininity designed to attract and secure a mate? Or was it simply social adaptation, the same kind of strategic self-presentation that everyone employed? In various contexts, standing before her mirror, Elena confronted an uncomfortable question. How much of her feminist identity was genuine conviction, and how much was another form of strategic positioning in the complex social dynamics between men and women? Marcus Weber found himself at an upscale bar in downtown Portland, nursing a whiskey and observing the Friday night mating rituals unfolding around him. At 42, divorced for 3 years, he had become an inadvertent student of modern romantic dynamics. The woman at the bar caught his attention not because of her obvious beauty, though she was striking, but because of how skillfully she navigated the attention of multiple suitors. Her name was Victoria, and she possessed what Schopenhauer might have called the natural cunning he attributed to women. Marcus watched as Victoria shifted personas subtly with each conversation. With the young investment banker, she was impressed by ambition and success. With the bearded artist, she appreciated creativity and authenticity. With the older professor herself, she valued intelligence and worldly experience. Each performance perfectly calibrated, Marcus thought. But which one is real? When Victoria approached him, Marcus felt the familiar tug of attraction warring with intellectual analysis. She was beautiful, yes, but more than that, she seemed to understand him immediately, to appreciate nuances of his personality that others missed. "You're not like the other men here," she said, her hand briefly touching his arm. "There's something deeper about you." Marcus recognized the line for what it was, a variation on the theme of masculine specialness that effective women used to disarm male defenses. Yet knowing this didn't diminish its power. If anything, recognizing the technique while still feeling its effects proved Schopenhauer's point about the will's supremacy over reason. Dr. Sarah Chen's session with Elena Rodriguez revealed layers of complexity that challenged both women's assumptions about gender and power. Elena had come seeking help processing her academic work on misogynistic philosophers, but their conversations quickly evolved into something deeper. "I find myself performing femininity even when I'm consciously rejecting it," Elena confessed. "In academic settings, I soften my arguments to seem less threatening. In dating, I hide aspects of my intelligence. It's like there's this unconscious script I'm following." Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. What if that's not weakness or deception, but a form of social intelligence? Women have historically survived by reading and adapting to social dynamics that men could afford to ignore. "But that's exactly what Schopenhauer criticized," Elena replied. He saw women as naturally manipulative, using charm and sexuality to compensate for what he considered intellectual inferiority. Or, Sarah suggested, he witnessed adaptive strategies developed in response to systemic powerlessness and misinterpreted them as character flaws. Their dialogue touched on evolutionary psychology, social conditioning, and the complex interplay between biology and culture in shaping gender roles. Elena began to see her own behavior not as betrayal of feminist principles, but as navigation of a social landscape that still punished women for directness while rewarding them for strategic indirection. Michael, the architect from Sarah's practice, found himself on an unexpected date with a colleague named Rebecca. She was different from his usual type, less conventionally beautiful, more intellectually direct, with a sardonic sense of humor that initially put him off balance. "You know what your problem is?" Rebecca said over dinner after Michael had recounted his dating disasters. "You want women to be simultaneously mysterious and transparent, sexually available and emotionally pure, independent and devoted. You've created an impossible standard that no real human could meet." Michael bristled. "I just want honesty. Is that too much to ask?" "Define honesty," Rebecca challenged. "Do you mean the brutal revelation of every thought and feeling from day one? Because that's not how any relationship works. We all reveal ourselves gradually, based on trust and compatibility." As the evening progressed, Michael found himself genuinely enjoying Rebecca's company. She didn't perform femininity in the ways he expected. She ordered steak instead of salad, argued politics without softening her positions, and made no apparent effort to be charming or accommodating. Yet somehow, this directness was more attractive than the careful performances he'd grown to distrust. For the first time, Michael wondered if what he'd been calling female deception was actually his own projection of impossible expectations onto the women in his life. Marcus Weber's relationship with Victoria deepened over several months, but not in ways he had anticipated. Rather than the manipulative seductress his philosophical training had prepared him to expect, he discovered a woman of genuine complexity, struggling with her own relationship to femininity and power. "You analyze me like I'm a specimen," Victoria said during one of their increasingly frequent conflicts, "like you're waiting for me to reveal my true nature as some kind of scheming temptress. Have you considered that your expectations might be shaping what you see?" Marcus was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. His expertise in Schopenhauer's philosophy had created a lens through which he viewed women that was both intellectually sophisticated and emotionally destructive. He found himself constantly analyzing Victoria's motives, looking for evidence of the manipulation and deception his philosophical framework predicted. "Maybe the real deception," Victoria continued, "is believing that you can understand another person through abstract theory rather than genuine relationship." The irony struck Marcus forcefully. In trying to protect himself from the will's deceptions, by maintaining analytical distance, he had sabotaged the very connection he claimed to want. His intellectual sophistication had become a barrier to emotional intimacy. Elena's academic work took an unexpected turn as she began exploring the intersection of Schopenhauer's pessimism with modern feminist theory. Rather than simply dismissing his ideas about women as outdated misogyny, she found ways to extract useful insights while rejecting their sexist applications. Schopenhauer was right about the will's deceptive power, she wrote in her revised thesis, but he mistakenly attributed to women specifically what is actually a universal human tendency towards self-presentation and strategic behavior in relationships. Her relationship with David, the tech entrepreneur, had evolved into something neither of them had expected. Their intellectual compatibility had created space for emotional honesty that Elena hadn't experienced before. She found herself able to be direct about her needs and desires without the softening performances she'd previously considered necessary. "I used to think feminism meant rejecting all traditionally feminine behaviors," Elena told David, "but maybe it means choosing consciously rather than performing unconsciously." David, who had his own history of failed relationships based on unrealistic expectations, appreciated Elena's directness. "I think I used to mistake performance for deception because I was performing too. The sensitive modern man who totally understood women. We were both trying to be what we thought the other wanted instead of figuring out what we actually wanted." Dr. Sarah Chen found herself integrating insights from her work with both Elena and Michael into a broader understanding of modern relationship dynamics. The patterns she observed weren't evidence of gendered pathology, but of universal human struggles with authenticity and connection in a complex social environment. What Schopenhauer identified as female deception, she wrote in her professional journal, might be better understood as adaptive strategies developed in response to historical powerlessness. Similarly, what appears as male naivety about female nature might reflect a privileged position that allowed men to avoid developing sophisticated social emotional intelligence. Her own relationship history reflected these dynamics. As a successful professional woman, Sarah had learned to modulate her competence in various contexts, not from deception, but from experience of how unmodulated competence was received. She had watched male colleagues express ideas directly, that she needed to frame more diplomatically to achieve the same results. The revelation shifted her therapeutic approach. Rather than pathologizing her clients' relationship difficulties, she began helping them understand the social contexts that shaped their behaviors and expectations. David's relationship with Elena challenged his own assumptions about women and intellectual compatibility. In previous relationships, he had unconsciously sought women who would admire his achievements without challenging his ideas. Elena's fierce intelligence and feminist perspective initially intimidated him, but ultimately proved more attractive than the agreeable femininity he'd previously preferred. "I think I was looking for a sophisticated accessory rather than an equal partner," David admitted to his friend Jake over drinks. "Someone smart enough to appreciate my success, but not so independent that she didn't need it." Jake, recently divorced, and bitter about dating apps, disagreed. "Women know exactly what they're doing. They present one version during courtship and reveal the real agenda after you're committed. It's evolutionary strategy." But David had experienced something different with Elena. Her directness about her career ambitions, her unwillingness to prioritize his schedule over her own, her comfort with intellectual disagreement, these qualities had initially seemed threatening, but ultimately proved refreshing. "Maybe what you're calling manipulation is just women being complex human beings with their own goals and needs," David suggested. "The ones who seemed easier before might have just been better at hiding their complexity." A year after Marcus's initial lecture on Schopenhauer, the various threads of exploration converged at an academic conference on philosophy and modern relationships. Elena presented her revised thesis, Sarah discussed her therapeutic insights, and Marcus found himself re-examining his entire approach to Schopenhauer's ideas about gender. Victoria attended Marcus's presentation, where he publicly acknowledged how his theoretical framework had damaged their relationship. "I confused intellectual sophistication with emotional wisdom," he admitted. "Schopenhauer's insights about desire and illusion are valuable, but applying them specifically to women reflects the limitations of his historical moment rather than timeless truths about gender." Elena's presentation drew standing ovation as she argued for a nuanced approach to problematic philosophical texts. "We can extract valuable insights about human psychology while rejecting their sexist applications. Schopenhauer's observations about the will's power to create romantic illusions are profound, but they apply to all humans, not just women." After the conference, the various participants found themselves in extended conversation about their experiences. Rebecca, Michael's girlfriend, offered a practical perspective. "Maybe the real issue isn't deception, but compatibility. When we have unrealistic expectations, normal human complexity looks like manipulation." 6 months later, the relationships that had emerged from this philosophical exploration reflected a different understanding of gender dynamics. Marcus and Victoria had reconciled, their connection now based on acceptance of complexity rather than analytical control. Elena and David had moved in together, their relationship characterized by direct communication and mutual respect for individual autonomy. Michael and Rebecca had married, their partnership built on shared values rather than romantic fantasy. Sarah had begun a relationship with a colleague who appreciated her professional competence without feeling threatened by it. At their monthly dinner gathering, a tradition that had emerged from their shared conference experience, the group reflected on their journey from Schopenhauer's harsh judgments to a more nuanced understanding of human relationships. "Schopenhauer was right that the will deceives us," Elena observed. "But the deception isn't gendered manipulation. It's the illusion that we can understand others through theory rather than relationship." Marcus raised his wineglass in a toast to the will's ultimate wisdom. teaching us that connection requires vulnerability, not analysis. As they laughed and continued their conversation, each person carried their own understanding of the complex interplay between philosophy and lived experience, between ancient wisdom and modern relationships, between the universal human tendency towards self-deception and the possibility of genuine connection despite our limitations. The evening ended with Sarah's observation. Maybe Schopenhauer's real insight wasn't about women at all, but about the human condition itself, our capacity for both self-deception and transcendence, our ability to create meaning through connection despite the will's apparent indifference to individual happiness. In the end, they had found a way to honor the philosophical tradition while moving beyond its limitations, creating space for relationships based on mutual respect, rather than gendered assumptions about deception and authenticity.